Good day, learners. My name remains Alao AA from the Department of Accounting, Faculty of Administration and Management Sciences, Olabisi Onabanjo University, Agowe. I'm the course facilitator for Act 417, Forensic Accounting and Fraud. Learners, you are welcome to Subsection 2, titled Fraud, the Meaning, Classifications and Theories. Before moving forward into this study session, let's quickly reflect on what we have learned in the first study session. You will recall that in the first study session, we tried to look at the overview of forensic accounting, and we started from the word forensic, which we said forensic simply means something that is suitable for the court of law. And from there, we related forensic, or we brought forensic into accounting. Then we have forensic accounting, and we said that forensic accounting is a combination of the investigative skill and also litigation skill. That is, forensic accounting is a way of engaging in an investigation which is to be used for litigation purpose. So from there, we look at the evolution and issue of forensic accounting, where we look at the work of Donald Crazy on the fraud triangle theory. And also we look at the services provided by forensic accountants. Then you talk about the investigative services and litigation services. And also we look at the difference between external auditing and forensic accounting auditor. And also in the last study session, session 1, we also look at the knowledge and skills of a forensic accountant. Let's talk about the fundamental skills, let's talk about the specialized skills. So learners, you are welcome to study session 2, like I said earlier. And this study session 2 is titled Fraud, the Meaning, Classifications and Theories. Learners, at the end of this particular study session 2, you should be able to describe fraud, discuss various classification of fraud, and also explain the rationale for fraud occurrence. Learners, what is fraud? Here we want to look at the meaning of fraud. Generally, fraud means different things to different people under different circumstances. That is, fraud can be perceived as deception. Also, one might say that fraud in the form of intentional deception, including lying and cheating, and also is the opposite of truth, justice, fairness, and equity. That is, anything that is contrary to truth, justice, fairness, and equity can be regarded as fraud. In the word of Dada 2013, fraud was described as a generic term embracing all multifarious means which human ingenuity can devise and which are resorted to by one individual to get advantage over another by false suggestion or by suppression of truth, and also includes surprise, trick, cunning, disabling, and any unfair way by which another is cheated. Also, the ACFE define occupational fraud as a special class of type and as the use of one's occupation for personal gain through the deliberate misuse or theft of the employing organization, resources, or assets. Therefore, it can be deduced that fraud is a broad category of financial related crimes, and it includes confidence schemes, act forgery, falsified scientific research data, lying on a resume, falsifying an insurance claim, cheating on income taxes, and hundreds of other possible schemes that will fall under the term fraud. So that is fraud. is a deception. Is anything in contrary or is anything opposite of justice, fairness, and equity. So that is definition of fraud. And looking at this last paragraph here, it can be said that hardly will someone be exonerated from fraud, or it can be deduced that almost everybody engage in one form or the other of fraud, either knowingly or unknowingly. And that is why it is said earlier in the last slide that fraud is a broad word. It involves and it looks into many things. Let us now analyze this last paragraph to support my deduction that fraud, that hardly can anyone be exonerated from one form of fraud or the other. In this paragraph, we have that it can be deduced that fraud is a broad category of financial related crimes, and it includes confidence schemes, act forgery, falsifying scientific research data, lying on a resume. That is, you are lying on your resume or your CV, curriculum vitae. Many people you are born, or many people ask different date of birth for different documents. It's a fraud. It's a fraud. Falsifying an insurance claim is also a fraud. If you falsify insurance claim, you want to just for you to get more, for you to be indemnified more than you are required. It's a fraud. Cheating on income taxes is a fraud. And hundreds of other possible schemes that will fall under the term fraud. Learners, you know that cheating in the examination hall is also a form of fraud. Learners, you also know that even on the side of the tutors or the facilitators or the lecturers, collecting bribe from students before passing them is a fraud. And even for a lecture that is slated for a particular time and without any genuine reason, you do not go to your class or you are coming late because you are being paid for that services, you are cheating on the students. It's a fraud. So that's why I said, if you look at it critically, hardly will anyone be free from the word fraud. It's just that intention different. That is, we have different intention. So learners, that is fraud there for you. From the definition, we now look at types of fraud. Fraud has numerous classification models. The first one, we have fraud committed against organizations and fraud committed on behalf of organization. What do we mean? We have certain frauds. Now that we know the definition of fraud, we have certain fraud that are committed against the organization, and here we have the employee fraud. That is the theft of company property or company fund, asset misappropriation. All these are fraud committed against organization, and they basically include or they basically involve the employee fraud. The second one is fraud committed on behalf of the organization. This one involves the financial statement fraud, which are committed by management. This fraud is committed by management on behalf of the organization. They are committed to protect the organization, though it's a fraud. And this is where we have a window dress financial statement, for instance. A company that is going under, instead of declaring the true picture of the organization, the management will want to manipulate or window dress financial statements just to show to the public that the company is still doing well. That is a fraud committed on behalf of the organization. It is committed to save the organization from public disreputation. Learners, aside the first one we have considered, we also have classification according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiner. The ACF defines occupational fraud as the use of one's occupation for personal enrichment through the deliberate misuse or misapplication of the employing organization's resources or assets. So, under the classification of ACFE, we have three classifications of fraud. We have asset misappropriation, we have corruption, and we have financial statement fraud or fraudulent statement. The first one, asset misappropriation. This occurs when employees use organization assets for what is not meant for. For instance, the vehicle of the organization that is meant for official use, you are not using it for personal use. Or for instance, the system or the television or the drone that is meant for the office, you are not transferring them to your own personal house. It's a form of fraud. The second one is corruption. Corruption is rampant in our society today. If care is not taken, everyone is engaging in one corruption or the other. And you know, corruption is a subset of fraud. Corruption involves taking bribe before doing your normal job. Corruption involves looking for kickbacks before you award a contract. Corruption occurs where lecturers, where tutors, or where the learners are developing certain things before they can do their normal job. That is corruption. The second one is financial statement fraud. Financial statement fraud, as described in our last slide, is a fraud that is committed by management on behalf of the organization. That is to save the organization from the public, to show to the public the organization is doing well. So all these are classification under the ACFE classification of fraud. Learners. The third category is the victim. Under the victim, we have the first one, we have entity as a victim. Under the entity as a victim, we have employee embezzlement, we have vendor fraud, and we also have customer fraud. Learners. Employee embezzlement is a form of fraud that occurs where employee uses their position to take or divert assets belonging to their employers. You are embezzling the fund, you are engaging in asset misappropriation. All these are employee embezzlement. Also, we have vendor fraud. This is a fraud that related to the suppliers, those that supply materials to the organization. They engage in overbill or provide lower quantity or provide lower quality or fewer goods than agreed. All these are vendor fraud. And if you look around our organizations today, most suppliers, most vendors do engage in this kind of fraud. Also, we have customer fraud. Customer fraud is the one coming from the side of the customers, where they refuse to pay, or they pay little, or get too much from the organization through deception. All these are forms of fraud that is coming under victim, under the entity as a victim. In all these three types we have considered, the entity serves as the victim. Learners. Still under the victim, that is entity as a victim, we have shareholders or other victim. Second one is shareholders as victims, and this involves the management fraud. And this occurs, though we have said, is a kind of fraud on behalf of the organization. And it's a kind of fraud where managers manipulate the financial statement to make the entity look better than it is. It's also known as financial statement fraud or a window dress form of fraud. So next one is victim as unwary of individual, and this includes investment scams and other customer fraud. Learners, having considered the various classification of fraud, let's also look at the theories of fraud. In this study session, we shall be considering three theories of fraud. The first one is fraud triangle theory, and this particular theory brings out or comes up with three reasons why individuals engage in fraud. The second one is fraud Pentagon theory, and the third one is fraud diamond theory. Let's now look them one after the other. The first one, fraud triangle theory, you will recall that we have mentioned this under our history and evolution of forensic accounting, where we mentioned these sociologists this scholar Donald Crazy. And Donald Crazy is the one that came up with the fraud triangle theory. And the fraud triangle theory is a framework designed to explain the rationale, the reason behind individuals or workers' decision to commit fraud in their various workplace. And the three reasons, the three justifications as highlighted by Donald Crazy are pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. Looking at pressure, individuals that engage in fraud will be justifying the act to have been caused due to pressure on them. Oh, because I have been pressurized, that's why I engage in it. They look at their workload, they look at the environment they work as a reason. They look at the volume of work they want to do. They look at the persistence of individuals on them. They look at the threats. They look at the pressure. They look at various demand from individuals to do certain things as reason why they are doing those things. That is pressure. And that's why when some employees are caught, they'll be telling us, or they'll be saying that they engage in that act because of the pressure from their boss. So that's one of the reasons people do come up when they are caught for engaging in fraud. The second one is opportunity. Also, people engage in fraud because of the opportunity they have. Perhaps opportunity of being a clerk, opportunity of being an accountant, opportunity of being a lecturer, opportunity of being anybody occupying a particular post. So they use that post to be a reason for engaging in one form of fraud. The third one is rationalization. Rationalization are those points, are those justifications that people do come up with to justify their indecent acts. You have seen situations where some workers will be saying that they engage in employee fraud because they are underpaid, because the company is not forthcoming with their salaries and the rest. All these are rationalization. All these are various justifications people come up with to justify whatever act of fraud they have engaged in. So learners, the fraud triangle theory centers on three basic elements, and these elements are reasons or justification why individuals or some people engage in fraud in their workplace. We have pressure, we have opportunity, and we have rationalization. Learners, the second theory is fraud diamond theory. Fraud diamond theory was proposed by Wolfe and Emerson in 2004, and this theory is a bit of extension of the fraud triangle theory. And what this theory does was to add the fourth element to the fraud triangle theory, which is capacity. That is, the potential perpetrator of fraud must have the skills and ability to actually commit the fraud. Capacity, according to this theory, is a person's position or function within a company, which gives him or her the ability to create or exploit an opportunity for fraud not available to others. That's capacity. That is, capacity as the head of a place, capacity as the controller of a place, capacity as a commander in a place. So all these are what people use as one of the yardsticks for engaging in fraud. And this has been as proposed by Wolfe and Emerson in 2004 under the fraud diamond theory. So learners, what we have said is that the fraud triangle theory is an extension of the fraud triangle theory, and which it added capacity to make the element of fraud to be 4. Learners, the third one is fraud pentagon theory, and this theory is an updated theory which covers the fraud triggering factors, and this theory was presented by Crowley Howard in 2011. And also, fraud triangle theory is an extension of fraud triangle and fraud diamond theory, and this theory adds another element to the family of fraud factors, and this element is arrogance. Arrogance is the superiority attitude for having certain rights and the feeling that the company's internal control or policy are not applicable to oneself. That is, arrogancy is when the head of a place, of a section, of a unit have that idea or that belief that the internal control system or the policy of the organization is not applicable to him as the head. So that is arrogance. That is arrogance. So that is the fifth element of fraud. Learners, you will recall that we have looked at 5 justifications for fraud. You look at 3 under fraud triangle as mentioned by Donald Acfe: pressure, opportunity, rationalization. In the fraud diamond, we have another one added, which is capacity. And in the fraud Pentagon theory, the fifth one was added, which is arrogance. So learners, all these are the theories of fraud. I want to thank you for your patience and understanding. Thank you for listening.